wrestling promoter, but don't let him hear you call him that. Vince McMahon is arguably the most successful wrestling promoter there has ever been, taking the regional World Wrestling Federation and expanding it into the global juggernaut that it is today. Even if some of the zip has come off his fastball in recent times, McMahon is still unmatched in his wrestling success, or as he would tell you, his sports entertainment success. But that success hasn't always translated to other fields. The McMidas touch may have turned so much squared circle pageantry into gold, but on many occasions, McMahon's tried to scratch the itch to succeed in other worlds, only to find that pro wrestling is his real bread and butter. McMahon has always seen himself as more than a pro wrestling guy. He views himself as a media mogul, someone with potential to be a player on grander stages. And no doubt, he's tried. Make no mistake, Vince McMahon is a powerful and confident individual, and he can't ever be told that he cannot do something. He has to try it and see for himself where things stand, with plenty of mixed results. The video ahead will examine some of the most ambitious projects of McMahon's, as well as some of his investments that he hoped would create stronger footholds for himself. WrestleMania was a gamble that worked. These, not so much. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 WWE business ventures that didn't work out. Join us. Number 10, the Snake River Canyon Jump. In 1974, long before the days of Hogan, WrestleMania, and Saturday Night's Main Event, Vince McMahon was a promoter with an insatiable yearning to prove himself, but with no monumental successes to his names just yet. He figured that was going to change when famed daredevil Evel Knievel floated the idea of jumping Snake River Canyon in the southern part of Idaho on a rocket-powered motorcycle. Figuring this would be the sort of event the American public would flock to see, McMahon met with Knievel to hash out a deal. McMahon invested heavily in the stunt, along with other promoters, including boxing impresario Bob Arum. The event was broadcast on closed-circuit television, to which the promoter's goal was to draw 1.8 million people for that medium, in addition to 50,000 attendees live on site. On that September day, though, nothing seemed to go right, as not only did the jump fail, which Knievel survived with minor injuries, but the audience was far smaller than was hoped. The closed-circuit viewership totaled less than a third of the goal, good for only about 500,000, while attending spectators topped off at maybe 15,000. For McMahon's part, he lost about $250,000 on the investment, which sounds like a drop in the bucket today, but he wasn't billionaire Vince in 1974 by any means. 2 years later, he filed for bankruptcy, situated $1 million in debt. Number 9, the Cape Cod Buccaneers. We'll get to Vince McMahon's attempts at starting professional sports leagues a little later in this video, but for now, we're going to look at the time he simply owned a team. In the late 70s, McMahon purchased the Cape Cod Coliseum in southeastern Massachusetts, which he would put to use for his still northeast-based WWF product. But he knew that the building could be used for more than just wrestling, and he wanted to put a hockey team in there. Working with an Indianapolis businessman named Fraser Gleason, McMahon founded the aforementioned Buccaneers to play in the fledgling Atlantic Coast Hockey League. The Buccaneers entered into the 1981 season led by head coach Jim Troy, who later became one of Vince's right-hand men in the WWF office. Unfortunately, they wouldn't see it through the year, as after 39 games, McMahon folded his team. When several franchises had suddenly gone belly up, and another was on the verge of doing so imminently, the league voted to hold the postseason long before it was intended. McMahon objected to the plan and chose to leave the world of hockey behind. The Buccaneers were actually days away from having legendary Philadelphia Flyers bruiser Dave the Hammer Schultz play a game for them as a publicity stunt of sorts, but the team's sudden liquidation scuppered that. Number 8, a boxing match. In 1988, famed multi-division title holder and all-time great Sugar Ray Leonard was coming out of retirement once more. He agreed to a double fight with Canadian prodigy Donnie the Golden Boy Lalande for Lalande's WBC light heavyweight title, and also to determine the first ever WBC super middleweight champion. WWF's parent company, Titan Sports, sunk $10 million for the broadcast rights to the fight, reportedly due to the allure of this fight potentially being Leonard's last. In other words, they figured this could be a very hot ticket. Leonard won the November 1988 fight via TKO, but how did it do on pay-per-view? Well, it's not clear, to be honest. Apparently, the cable companies agreed to a confidentiality clause, so no confirmed buy rate statistics have ever been disseminated. The WWF floated favourable numbers that indicate the fight was a net positive, while other estimates from Dave Meltzer and the research firm Paul Kagan Associates are considerably less rosy. What's clear is that the WWF didn't do much more in way of promoting boxing after that. The Leonard Lalande fight was hyped up on the WWF's weekly programs, more than 2 months worth of incessant promotion. Wherever the truth lies in the final numbers, it apparently wasn't enough to be worth the WWF's dollar. Number 7, the World Bodybuilding Federation. Perhaps it wasn't the brightest idea for McMahon to start a venture centered on chiseled physiques when his wrestling enterprise was receiving increased scrutiny in regards to how his heavyweights got their muscles. Nonetheless, McMahon founded the WBF as a competitor to the International Federation of Bodybuilding and proceeded to sign away a number of IFBB competitors, dubbed body stars, which are like superstars but more, bodily, to lucrative contracts. The WBF was cross-promoted on WWF programming throughout 1991 and 1992, and in both years the organization held competition-based pay-per-views. But despite the efforts to infuse bodybuilding with pro wrestling style grandeur and gimmicks, few were buying what McMahon was selling. Bodybuilding fans found the WBF to be too hammy and silly, while wrestling fans weren't flocking to this new product. In fact, the 1992 pay-per-view managed roughly 3,000 pay-per-view buys compared to the nearly 400,000 for that year's WrestleMania. A Saturday morning tie-in program hosted by Vince himself came and went fairly quickly. The WBF's lasting legacy can be found in Ico Pro, a line of supplements that the WWF hawked for several years, even as many of the wrestlers themselves ridiculed their apparent awful taste. Still, fans of a certain age remember that Ico Pro banner that hung at WWF events, and it even made a brief comeback for Raw's 25th anniversary in 2018. Number 6, Radio WWF. By 1993, television had long replaced radio as the primary home entertainment medium, and we were only about a generation away from streaming services leaving traditional TV in the dust. All radio was good for in 1993 was Howard Stern's unfiltered offerings, so it's a little curious that WWF entered into that market. Their service was simply called Radio WWF, and the basic idea was to offer 2 different kinds of auditory products, an alternative commentary feed for WWF pay-per-views, and a combination interview/call-in show. While the commentary idea seemed iffy at best, it was only done for the 1993 SummerSlam and Survivor Series, the call-in show had greater potential. The broadcast wasn't afraid to break kayfabe, talking about other promotions, while giving Randy Savage the forum to legitimately air his real-life issues with Hulk Hogan during one astounding broadcast. Unfortunately, Radio WWF didn't last, as not enough stations were willing to carry the wrestle-centric product. By 1994, the show was in its death throes, and when JR was briefly fired from the WWF, McMahon took over as host, to which, perhaps not surprisingly, the walls of kayfabe suddenly became a lot more reinforced. Credit where it's due, however, long before shoot interviews and wrestling podcasts became standard, the WWF did offer something of the sort. Number 5, WWF New York. WWE has left a pretty deep footprint in the Big Apple through the decades, though as far as venues go, you tend to first think of Madison Square Garden in its various forms. Wrestling in New York is forever identifiable with the Garden, but come the Attitude Era, wrestling was so hot button that it made sense to expand its reach to non-wrestling venues. And in New York, what better way to paint the town with sports entertainment hues than by infiltrating the nightlife? That is where WWF New York came in. A combination nightclub/restaurant/gift shop, WWF New York was to McMahon's product what the Hard Rock Cafe is to aging rock stars. Even if you've never been to the site in Times Square, you've probably seen it plenty through constant promotion on WWE TV. Various stars appeared there for drop-in spots during TV and pay-per-view, while Sunday Night Heat was filmed there for a time. It even appears in the company video games as a location you can brawl in. By 2002, the building was renamed The World following the World Wildlife Fund lawsuit, though the name change was also an attempt to attract more than just wrestling fans. The decision was made to close the facility the following year, and the building has since been taken over by, who else? Hard Rock Cafe. Number 4. SmackDown Records. Music is a vital part of professional wrestling. Hell, one of the most important eras in WWE history was based on fusion with the MTV galaxy, the rock and wrestling connection. Understanding the appreciation fans had for the sounds of the arena, the WWF released numerous compilation albums of either wrestlers' theme music or of the stars of the ring belting out tunes in disquieting fashion. The former concept was a license to print money, as we've all impersonated our favorite wrestlers' entrances in the privacy of our own homes in time with the music, and we all still do this. Don't lie, you absolutely do, and so do I. But the WWF wanted to do more than just hit the charts with Jim Johnston's latest compositions. They officially launched their own label, SmackDown Records, in the autumn of 2000, and there were apparently plans to leave a non-wrestling footprint in the music world. They went so far as to sign a metal band called Neurotica to the label in 2001, but they were the only act WWE managed to acquire. In fact, sometime after Neurotica released an album the following year, the group left SmackDown Records and subsequently split up. No more outside acts were signed by the label, and by 2006, SmackDown Records simply became WWE Music Group, where its primary focus has been on the entrance themes. Number 3. The XFL. Rather than focus on the 2020 relaunch that earned positive reactions before the sudden and abrupt end of play due to the pandemic, let's look back at the first go-round. "Where's my football?" Vince mockingly cried at that press conference while decrying the corporate makeup of the National Football League. The XFL was going to be the antidote to those that missed the smash-mouthed, hard-nosed football from a bygone time. Like many would-be challengers to an established monarch, the XFL vowed to be revolutionary while bringing back flavors of the old school. In other words, it wanted to be the past and the future at the same time, and that's usually a formula for disaster. The WWFization of football drew a curious audience for its first week of play, but by the end of the season, viewership had pretty much dwindled to third hour of Raw in 2020 levels. Gimmicks like Jesse Ventura trying to start a feud with Coach Rusty Tillman and a look inside the cheerleaders' locker room felt cheap and third-rate. Some innovations, like the camera work, demonstrated a positive kind of forward thinking, but there was too much wrestling for football purists, and the football that was there wasn't all that exciting. Losses well into the tens of millions meant that the XFL got sacked for a huge loss, and McMahon had little choice but to punt after one season. Number 2. WWE Universe Social Media Network. We all spend more time than we need to on social media, sucking up the toxicity and uninformed opinions of dullards that seem to exist only to make our days miserable. And we're just talking about our relatives there. The total strangers we encounter are way worse. But with the rise of Twitter, Facebook, and MySpace, oh, I miss you, Tom, WWE decided to try to outdo them all with their all-encompassing social network called WWE Universe, launching the service in late 2008. The network actually started out as WWE Fan Nation, and essentially became a hub for fans to post videos and photos, argue on the forums, create their own role-playing e-feds, and just talk all things WWE, in addition to happenings elsewhere in the world of wrestling. In other words, WWE created a space for wrestling fans to do what they were already doing on Facebook, only without a Henry Godwinn-themed version of Farmville to really put their own stamp on it. Some wrestlers later derided the service, pointing out the obvious that WWE couldn't just forge their own presence on popular existing services, instead trying to build their own outside world. By the dawn of 2011, the WWE Universe announced that it was shutting down. A decade later, the company does just fine on social media sites that everybody already uses. Number 1. Tout. Oh, flippin' Tout. If you missed that charmingly awkward period in 2012 in which wrestlers all began using a poor man's version of Vine to express their innermost angst and hostility, you didn't miss too much. But those who saw it will never forget the time Brock Lesnar announced a kayfabe retirement through a video service that WWE just so happened to invest $5 million in the previous month. Of all people to have embraced Instagram video without the Instagram, they did choose a big-name star, but one known for bucking societal trends and preferring solitude. In other words, Brock's usage of Tout felt about as natural as most award show banter. Worse still was WWE's constant airing of 15-second Tout out videos from fans who gave their takes on the storyline goings-on. Earnest as some of these true blue fans were, they really failed to add any kind of zest to the show, and it only served to make Tout seem less and less cool. You got the impression very quickly that nobody outside of WWE really used Tout at all, and when you learn that a hefty investment from WWE into the service is the root cause of its plastering all over Monday Night Raw, you understand why WWE wanted so badly for it to become a craze. Instead, by 2014, WWE washed their hands of the partnership, leaving Tout in the scrap heap with so many other failed ventures for a wrestling promoter that conquered wrestling many times over, but had far less success in leaving a positive mark beyond his squared circle home.